This is where Rosa Parks stood to get on the bus in December of 1955. She was working right here in this second building. The buildings are different now, but Montgomery Fair Department Store is a seamstress. It's always interesting to me how in the kind of characterization of her, people say that she was this old woman. She was 42.
And they said she was tired, and she was no way tired.
Right, she was not tired. She was tired of the system, but she was not tired. So she stood here, she boarded the bus. We know essentially how the story goes. She's told to give up her seat, and she said she felt that she didn't have to. She had been to the Highlander previous to that, and she said she thought about Emmett Till and said, I'm not getting up. And then she was arrested. So the Women's Political Council, and we've had a number of really wonderful sharings on the bus about the centrality of women to the Montgomery Bus Boycott, both as the organizers and architects of the boycott, as well as those who refused to ride the bus and engaged in what would be an economic boycott that would eventually result in success.
Rosa Parks was not only an organizer of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, but had been an organizer for a long time, investigating rapes, investigating lynchings, and so forth. She was a little bit like Ella Baker, very courageous woman leader who went into extremely dangerous places to do very dangerous things. A little bit before Mrs. Parks refused to give up her seat, she had been at a workshop in Highlander Folk School. In the South, there were many movement centers, and one of them was Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee. It's now in Newmarket, Tennessee, still operating. Rosa Parks said in one of the workshops, I wish that we would be able to have a mass movement in the Deep South, but she said the people in Montgomery will never do anything. They're just not going to move. They're just stuck in their ways and they're not going to do anything. And that was just a little while before she took that stand. So when she took that stand by sitting down, she really didn't think that she didn't have a hope that there was going to spark a huge movement coming out of that.
The boycott lasts. They thought it would be a one-day boycott. It's exceptionally successful. It lasts 381 days, and it would end with the ruling Browder versus Gale, which was a lawsuit that involved actually 4 other women who had done the same as Rosa Parks previous to that. Last night, the gentleman who was sitting at our table said something that I thought was very profound and useful in understanding. He said his niece said, because he said his father was one of the individuals who would drive people around as part of the ride share, and he said, oh, his niece said, you guys were the first Uber. That's essentially what it was. And so they would engage in a very massive rideshare program. So much so that one way to undermine it was that the insurance company started to drop the insurance of those individuals who were involved in it. And so Dr. King enlisted one of his friends, who was an African-American owner of an insurance company, and picked up the insurance. When they first started, he called his friend in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a Reverend Jemison, and he asked him about how he instituted the rideshare. You know why? Because in 1953, Baton Rouge, Louisiana had had a bus boycott as well. And so he called him so that he could take what Reverend Jemison learned from that moment and apply it here. They did not entirely desegregate the buses in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They created what those engaged in it wanted to call a more humane system, that there would be a few reserved in the back for African Americans, a few in the front for whites, and in the middle, anyone, it was first come, first served. So they paid it forward to create a more successful boycott.
The black community in Montgomery had been furious over the bus situation for a long time, and people had been arrested before. In fact, a young black woman was arrested earlier. But E.D. Nixon was the president of the NAACP branch here. The NAACP believed in legal strategy, and they were looking for a good test case. What they meant by a test case was that someone would be arrested and it would quietly go to the Supreme Court, and years later they would say, hey, you can't have segregation in your buses anymore. Anyway, when it did happen, nobody had planned it that particular time. So when Rosa Parks was arrested, she probably was allowed one phone call. She might have called E.D. Nixon. What happened is that Virginia Durr and Clifford Durr went down to the jail to bail Ms. Rosa Parks out. And that was the signal for Joanne Robinson, who was one of the quiet women leaders in Montgomery. They put their operation into high gear, and they decided that they would have a one-day boycott to make the point of what was happening here. And so the rest is history.